Hey guys, today we're going to be looking a little bit deeper at Animal Farm and the symbolism and connections we see in there. In our general overview, we talked about how different characters in Animal Farm represented different individuals in history in the symbolic level, but that Animal Farm as a whole was understood as an allegory, which means you could read it as simply a fable talking about walking, talking animals in their society, or you could read it at a deeper understanding that this was all about the Russian Revolution individuals associated with it. We're going to look more into that background and those connections symbolically today between Karl Marx, Leon Trotsky, and Joseph Stalin in particular. So first off, a little bit of history on the background of the Soviet Union. So Orwell is going to use the whole idea of the Soviet attempt at communism to condemn any group or political body that tries to gain control over the masses and eliminate their individual freedom and choices. And the problem was setting up this whole political scenario was that in 20th century Russia, you had like 2% of the population, which had the wealth, the finances, and the power that controlled the other 98% of the working class and extreme poor. And so you had this group of poor that is now going to follow the ideas, philosophies of Karl Marx. And he was of the mindset that everybody should be equal financially, intellectually, and we'll get more into what that means in just a minute. But they followed Karl Marx's doctrine, and his general view was that workers of the world unite. That once all these workers, this 98%, rallied together and fought back against the 2%, that the equality would happen at that point in time because there's no way to resist such large numbers. So Marx's theory, Marx believed all property should be commonly owned and that it would make everybody equal. So if no one has any personal property, that's what distinguishes us and creates inequality. So if no one owns anything and the government owns it all, it creates equality. Then you have the Russian Revolution is going to start, and Vladimir Lenin in particular is going to seize on these ideas of Marx, and he is going to gain control of Russia, and he's going to take over all the land and the industry. There's no longer going to be private control on either of them, and he's going to place them under government supervision. So then after Lenin dies, there's this power void that's left because he has made sure that all the power is now in the government, him. And so there's no more private control. And so after Lenin's death, there's this power struggle between Stalin and Trotsky. And Stalin's actually going to win that and get rid of Trotsky. So after Lenin dies, Stalin and Trotsky are trying to gain control of the Soviet Union, the Communist Party, and Stalin's going to win, and he's going to use his power in vicious, horrible ways, and he's going to kill and imprison anyone who says or does anything that is against him. And just to give you a little bit of perspective, it's estimated that when Stalin ruled the Soviet Union, that 20 million people, and this is on the low estimates. I saw as much as 30 looking through the research, but on the low estimate, 20 million people, citizens, were murdered while he was in power. And while he was in power, the Soviet Union is going to begin to crumble. Economic plans are going to fail. You're going to have violence. You're going to have fear. You're going to have starvation. It's going to go throughout the entire Soviet Union. And the people are going to find out they were no better with Stalin than they were when the Tsar was in power. So let's take a look at some of these allegorical connections we'll see here in the book. The first one is the government theory of Animal Farm is animalism, and that is symbolic of communism. So in animalism, there's no owners, there's no rich, but there's also no poor. Everybody is supposed to be equal under animalism. And it's the same thing under communism. You get rid of the aristocrats that are in society, and they and the workers, they share everything and they become one. Under animalism, workers get a better life and all animals are equal. And under communism, the same concept. All people are equal. And under animalism, every one of those animals is an owner of the farm. And under communism, the government owns everything, but then the people own the government. So these are the theories behind them. But theory and practice tend to be two very different things. So Animal Farm and the Russian Revolution. The Animal Revolution was supposed to make life better for everyone, but in fact, life ended up being worse at the end, and the leaders became as bad as, and some could argue worse than, the original humans they rebelled against. Under the Russian Revolution, it was supposed to fix everything that was wrong with the Tsar and the society, but again, life was still worse, and it was worse long after the revolution. And Stalin, when he took power, he made the Tsar look like a nice guy. People hated the Tsar, but no one could say anything about Stalin at this point because it was instant death. So then you've got this idea of Old Major in the book, and Old Major is the old boar pig that is introduced in the book, and he is symbolic of Karl Marx. So Old Major is going to be teaching the others animalism. He's going to believe the animals need to revolt. He believes that even the lower animals that aren't very smart or, don't do a whole lot, they all have to come together. But he dies before any of this actually happens and sees it to fruition. And the same thing's going to be with Karl Marx. He invented this idea of communism, this theory. He believed in that idea of workers of the world unite, but he also dies before the Russian Revolution. Then you also have Napoleon, symbolic of Stalin. Napoleon was not a good speaker. He was not clever at all like Snowball was. He was cruel and mean and selfish and corrupt. His ambition for power caused the death of all his opponents, and he's going to use the dogs, which are equivalent to the KGB, Squealer, who's going to be equivalent of propaganda, to control all the other animals. And you have Joseph Stalin. He was not a good speaker. He was not highly educated. Trotsky was. But he was the same as Napoleon. He didn't really follow Marx's ideas. He saw this as a way to gain power for himself. It corrupts him in the end. He cared about that power and killed anybody that opposed him, and he's going to use the KGB, the church, and propaganda to control the people. Then you have Snowball and Trotsky. Snowball is young, smart, idealistic, a good speaker. You get the idea, he really does want to make this better for everybody. He's the idealist, and he's chased away into exile by Napoleon's dogs. Trotsky, in real life, he was the other leader of the October Revolution. He was a pure communist. He followed Marx's ideas to a T. He wanted to improve life for Russia, but he was chased away by Lenin's KGB, the secret police. Then we've got Squealer and the propaganda in the newspapers. Squealer has a big mouth, talks a lot, convinces the other animals what to believe and to follow Napoleon. And he's the one that's going to change the rules and manipulate these different commandments. And then the newspapers are going to work for Stalin the same way Squealer is working for Napoleon. It's going to support this image that he's trying to portray of this strong leader who is always looking out for his people. They used any lie they could to convince the people to follow Stalin. And the propaganda in the newspapers are going to benefit from the fact that education was controlled. Education was controlled. Then we've got Mr. Jones, who's representative Tsar Nicholas II. Jones was irresponsible. He let his animals starve. Sometimes he was cruel to them. Sometimes he was kind to them. He was not a very consistent, good leader. Tsar Nicholas was the same way, a poor leader at best when you compare him to the other kings that were operating in Europe at the time. Cruel and brutal with his opponents. Sometimes he was kind and would hire students as spies to make extra money when they traveled overseas. The dogs in Animal Farm are representative of the KGB. The dogs were a private army controlled by Napoleon. They used fear and force to make the animals work and do what they want to. They killed or intimidated anybody who spoke out or said or did anything that was contrary to Napoleon and his ideas. The KGB were this same way. They really weren't police. They were Stalin's sort of hit squad. They did whatever Stalin asked them to do. They often killed entire families for disobedience. We've got Molly and the humans in the story, and Molly in particular is going to be more of the aristocrats. The humans are going to represent this attribute of greed. Molly was vain. She loved herself more than anything else, didn't really care about the other animals on the farm, went with anyone who gave her what she wanted. She was the first to get out of Animal Farm when she saw what was happening. Same as the aristocrats who could, got out of Russia as soon as they could. Human greed, the people on the outside didn't saw the revolution and they didn't care about what was happening, or at least that's how it appeared. They thought only of themselves and went to other countries and helped them, or went other places that would offer them more. Then you have Moses the Raven, who's representative of religion, and particularly the Russian Orthodox Church. Moses talked about Sugar Candy Mountain, which is the equivalent of heaven, a works-based heaven that you can get to Sugar Candy Mountain if you work hard. He kept the animals' spirits up despite harsh conditions. Napoleon let him stay because his teachings had the animal work without complaining. And then you've got this idea of religion. Communism is the religion. That's what he wanted people to follow. Religion was tolerated only in that it would make people work. If it crossed the line and anything else other than work, it was gone. Stalin knew that religion that forced people to work would stop violent revolutions that were happening elsewise in the country. Then you've got Boxer, who's part of the working class. Strong horse, Napoleon's always right, never questioning authority, but Napoleon betrayed him and killed him. And this is the working class. They believed Stalin because he was a communist. He said he was out for their good. And many stayed loyal even after they realized he was a tyrant, and Stalin ended up killing many of these. The windmill is symbolic of the Industrial Revolution. The windmill was supposed to make life easier and shorten the work week. It was destroyed, so let's build a new one. Whereas the Industrial Revolution, the 5-year plan, it was supposed to improve Soviet industry and increase productivity, release the burden on the working man, shorten the week. It failed miserably. And Stalin kept putting out 5-year plans again and again and again. Then you have Mr. Frederick and Adolf Hitler. He was known for being vicious to the older animals, beating animals, throwing them in his furnace, and he and his farm hands came and attacked Animal Farm. That's the pact, symbolically, of the pact between Hitler and the Soviet Union that was broken during World War II. So Adolf Hitler himself, like Frederick, committed unthinkable crimes against humanity during the Holocaust and broke that pact. Then finally, we have Mr. Pilkington and the capitalist government. Mr. Pilkington was another Animal Farm neighbor and is representative more of Great Britain and the United States, a lot of those allied nations during World War II. Napoleon tries to work with Pilkington, and the relationship goes icy at the very end of the book when they're playing poker together at the table and both playing ace of spades. Well, there's only going to be one ace of spades in the deck, so somebody's cheating, and it doesn't really tell us who. It leaves you wondering at the end. But that's sort of the capitalist governments. The Western countries, such as the United States and Great Britain, and at the end of World War II, you've got this idea of a Cold War, this fight without soldiers between the United States and the Soviet Union and Great Britain. And so symbolically, that breaks down all the animals of Animal Farm.